In this video, I've got a series of objects that are aligned in a group, and over that group we have both a bend and a stretch applied. If we look carefully, we see that all three elements are unattached and they're not a part of a common mesh. In the modifier stack, we see there's a bend and a stretch that's been applied across all three of the objects simultaneously, such that if we go to use the bend, we can see all three objects are bending together. We can also see that there's a stretch that's applied across all three objects, so that when we use the stretch, all three objects stretch. Looking really carefully, you'll notice that the stretching and bending only occurs over the length of the bellows-like form, so that the solid pieces, the end caps on either side, just like in an accordion, those do not bend or stretch or distort in any fashion. Let's see how this is set up. So here we look at a copy of the same collection of objects. You see there's a front door cap, there's a middle span here to this structure, and then there's an end cap. All three of the objects are polymeshes, and the middle piece and the front piece both have morphers applied to them. You'll notice in the more complex of the two that I have a collection of modifiers here on top of my editable poly. It's a simple surface model that's been built up as a triangulated surface that bends and folds cleanly, and immediately above that is a morpher where I have two versions of this geometry that give me the open and closed sidewall. On top of that is a shell, just to give this dimension, so that when it opens we can see that there's a thickness to the shell, and also so that it renders properly. The piece that's at the front, or the front door, has a small porch on it, and there's a door that opens. Looks like some sort of a moon base structure. There's a morpher modifier on top of this geometry, and if we scrub back and forth, we see that one of these morphers accounts for a ramp that deploys, and the other channel that's been filled up with the geometry here accounts for an open and closing door. The open and closing door is just a discrete element, and it's just moved as an object. So how do we get all three of these to bend and stretch together? I could very easily group these first and then set up all of the modifiers on top of the group, which is perfectly fine, or we can simply just grab the three geometries that are going to be part of this assembly, and you'll notice in the modifier stack it says 3 objects selected. So I'm going to grab all 3 of those, we're going to pull down, and we are going to find the stretch modifier. You'll see now that if I make adjustments to the stretch modifier, all 3 objects stretch together. They don't move apart or separate, and we need to choose the proper orientation for this. I believe it's the x-axis along which we want our stretching to occur. But we have a bit of a problem here. 2 things. We have some distortion, and we have stretching occurring across all 3 geometries, and we want to limit the stretching to only occur across the bellows geometry. So the first thing we're going to do to account for some of the distortion, the trick for that is to put in a wildly negative amplification, and that seems to remedy, well, at least the distortion for the sake of a visual demonstration. In terms of engineering and mechanical accuracy, this isn't what we need to do. So now when we make adjustments to the stretching, we don't get the wild distortion and the curvature, but we still have stretching occurring across all 3 geometries. The next thing that we want to do is limit the effect. I'm going to turn on the limit effect checkbox here. It's easier to see when we zoom into the plan view that there are 2 break lines inside this modifier that represent the limit to the effect. And you can either type in a value if you know what it is, or you can scrub. And if you look at the orange boundary line there, I want to get that to stop right at the seam between my bellows geometry and the solid end cap. I'm going to do likewise for the opposite side, and you will already notice that the stretching is being taken off of the solid pieces and is only applying over the length of the bellows geometry. Now if we make adjustments to stretching, you see stretching only occurs within the limited range, and we've established that to be just over the bellows geometry. Now we want all three of these to work together. That's why all three have been placed under the same stretch. Otherwise, if we had just a stretch on the bellows, the rigging to get the stretch geometry here to relate to the solid pieces on either side would be far more complicated. The next thing we're going to do is add a simple bend to this. So we can have a similar transformation of the structure, but it's just going to be bending right here in the middle. So I'm going to pull down to find the bend modifier, and as we saw before, the bend is going to be all over the place, and we need to find the right orientation for that bend and direction, and then we want to limit the effects on this just as well. So you can see that I've made adjustments to my bend modifier. I presently have no angle on the bend, but I have changed the direction. My bending is along my x-axis, but if I have this set to 0 and we go to bend, we're going to find that this thing wants to bend in a direction that's perpendicular to the ground. So along the x-axis, we want the bending to occur at 90 degrees in this particular instance, and you can see now that my bending occurs in the proper direction. I've also limited the bending so that it only takes place over the length of the area where the bellows geometry occurs. Now that I have my elaborate rig set up, we can bend across the whole geometry. We can stretch the whole geometry, and we can also then select individual components inside. Don't touch the bend or stretch, these are global across all three. I'm going to come down to the morpher, and we can now open the sidewall, and if we select the end cap here at the entrance and move down to morpher, I can open my door and deploy my ramp.